The first night I arrived at Domaine de Lucie, the wind smelled like green almonds and rain. Somewhere beyond the cypress row, a metal wind chime counted the seconds between distant thunder and the certainty that I should have turned back. A vineyard breeds in seasons, they had told me in school, but this one had a widow's pull, steady, polite, and full of rooms where no one opened the curtains. I was hired to save a wine that had lost its way. The 2016 Lucie, named for his dead wife, had slipped into a phase the locals called La Mémoire Amère, the bitter memory, where perfectly sound bottles opened with a shy aroma and then collapsed into ash and shadow. The owner, Adrien, had written to my office in Paris with an old-fashioned formality. "We ask for the nose that can read a storm." My supervisor laughed when she handed me the file. "If anyone can breathe sweetness back into grief," she said, "it's you." Adrien met me at the stone steps with a towel thrown over his shoulder like a surrendered flag. He was taller than in the articles, hair darker than the sun had any right to allow, and his smile carried the kind of hospitality that requires no warmth. "Clara," he said, testing the name as if it were a barrel he might keep. "You must be tired. We taste at 9. "I'd like to see the cellar now," I answered, because I am better at rooms than at men. The door sighed when he opened it. Cool air rose with a grace I've only ever known in churches. The lanterns along the vaulted ceiling shone through dusky glass like moonlight in jars. I walked between the rows, fingertips held a respectful inch from the bottles, reading the humidity with my skin, listening for the soft ticking of a wine that still wants to live. That's what I do. I put my face to a glass neck and asked time what it meant. On a center table, he had laid out 6 bottles of Lucie, 2014 to 2019. The labels wore a small constellation of dust. He watched me with a calm that felt like a dare. I opened the 2016 first. It was the one that had brought me here, the one the export buyers were whispering about in the language of cancelled contracts. The cork came out clean, no mold, no mildew, only a faint bruise of fennel seed. I tilted the glass and watched the meniscus move, slow as a secret. "Do you always start with the wound?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Otherwise the body lies." I inhaled. The first nose was timid, white peach fuzz, a thread of verbena, then to soon a dry echo, like breathing through paper. I waited. Wines are like people. They tell the truth at the edge of your patience. After a minute, the ash lifted and a small orchard returned, humming. I exhaled. "It isn't dead," I said, more to the bottle than to him. "It's remembering something it doesn't want to lose." He didn't speak for a long time. The lantern made a gold band across his mouth, a wedding he still wore. "Will you need anything?" he asked finally. "Besides time, fresh glassware, a neutral candle, a notary of silences." It was a joke I make when I'm nervous. He didn't smile, but the room did. He left me there. I wrote, "Juniper, peach, whetstone. Early oxidation threatens, then retreats like a tide embarrassed to have come too far." The bitterness is not a flaw. It is a story that hasn't learned its ending. I made a plan: micro-oxygenation trials, strict temperature discipline, and a consultation with the cooper who had over-toasted the 2016 second fill barrels. But plans are scaffolding. It's breath that matters. At 9, we tasted in the kitchen because that's where grief lives. The long oak table had a runner of rosemary and wild thyme. A single bee kept forgetting it was not summer. He poured. We talked in the language of grams per liter and volatile acidity, of phenolics and patience, professional words, clean as knives. And then he said Lucie, softly, to no one. The bee paused in the air. I pretended to note something in my ledger. I have a rule about the dead. You do not compete with them. You do not try to be louder. You do not say I'm here as if that changes the map. You named the wine after her, I said, neutral as linen. I named the vineyard, he corrected, and all the vines outside stood a little straighter. The wine named itself. After, he showed me the house. It was beautiful in the way confidence is beautiful. On the landing hung a photograph of a woman on a bicycle, hair half-tamed by a scarf, mouth open mid-laugh. Not pretty, no. Alive. The kind of alive that keeps a room lit for years after the electricity fails. I slept in a corner room where the shutters clicked like typewriter keys. The night was green and full of frogs. Sometime after midnight, rain came so gently the house thought it was dreaming. I woke with the certainty that a man in the next room had said a name, and that the name had found me as if I had been asked to carry it down the hall. In the morning, the harvest crews arrive with songs. I dressed in old jeans and the navy sweater my sister calls my armor. In the vet room, I set up the trial rig, labeled the micro-ox tank Sambra, Verbena, the little jokes to keep the science from scaring itself. The cellar master, Haloon, joined me with a clipboard and questions sharp enough to sew with. I liked her immediately. We worked until noon. When I stepped outside, the vineyard had become an orchestra. The clatter of bins, the soft gasp of leaves when lifted, the swear word music of men with sticky hands. Adrien was everywhere at once, a conductor who refused to stand still. He lifted a child into the shade, adjusted a hose, wrote a number on the back of his wrist. When he came near me, the air changed temperature. "Your face says the 2016 can be saved," he said. "My face says we won't know for a month," I answered. He nodded. "My face says I'm learning to live inside questions." We ate standing up bread with salt, tomatoes like bells. He reached across me for the olive oil, and his shoulder brushed my shoulder. And the world did not stop, but it did tilt, a polite degree. I hate that this is how it begins, not with violins, but with a body remembering a body is warm. In the afternoon I inspected barrel 48, the rumor barrel. The one the workers believed was either cursed or a miracle depending on who you asked. I pulled a thieving of wine, lifted it to the light. It shone the pale gold of September hair. The nose leapt, quince, lemon zest, a whisper of something marine, as if the wind had told the vines a secret from the coast. I smiled despite myself. He found me smiling. "Ah," he said. "So she still hums." "I think this one remembers joy," I said. "You sound like her," he answered without thinking, and then froze as if the cellar had teeth. "I'm sorry, I'm not a ghost," I said, "but I'm not afraid of one." We stood there looking at the same light. Differently. There are moments where you can hear fate clearing its throat. This was not one. This was only to people trying to be precise about what they owe the world and failing. That night, thunder paraded across the far hills, but never arrived. I took my ledger to the terrace and wrote, "The bitterness is the hinge, not the door." A moth battered itself against the lamp, desperate for a mistake. Adrien sat 2 chairs away, equal parts presence and apology. We did not speak for a long time. "Sometimes," he said finally, "the harvest nights make me forget we are not infinite." "And in the morning?" I asked. "In the morning," he said, "I carry crates." He poured a half glass of the 2016 we had left to breathe. It had settled into itself, as certain wines do when the room stops staring. He handed it to me and, before he could stop whatever old habit lived in his throat, he leaned close and whispered into my hair, "Lucy." I did not flinch. I set the glass down. He closed his eyes as if a storm had just learned his address. The harvest knives on the table kept shining. I could have said, "I am here to teach your wine to breathe. I cannot teach you." I could have packed my notes and called a taxi and left him with his beautiful ghosts. Instead, I stood and walked to the railing. The vines were black lace against a pale sky. Somewhere, a fox passed through the weeded rows like a rumor. I thought of what my supervisor had said, sweetness back into grief. She had meant the wine. But I know what happens when you exhale into a sealed room. The candle burns brighter, then the air goes thin. "Tomorrow," I said, turning back, "we start with barrel 48. It remembers joy. We can teach the others how." He opened his eyes. The apology was still there, but so was something newly careful. "Thank you," he said. And the words were simple. The way bread is simple. The way forgiveness is sometimes not a cathedral but the act of passing a person the salt. I took my glass and went inside. On the landing, the photograph of the woman on the bicycle waited with all its light. I touched the wooden frame the way one touches a door before entering a darkened theater. It is possible to love the stage and still refuse to act. In my room, I wrote 4 words under the day's notes. "Do not compete. Breathe." Outside, the wind shifted. The vineyard inhaled. And I understood, with the clarity I only get once a year if I am good, that I had arrived not to win, but to witness. The saving, if it happened, would not belong to me. But I also knew this. Somewhere between barrel 48 and the storm that would not come, something had already begun. They said barrel 48 was charmed. But on the second morning, the only magic I found was the thin mist rising from the vines, and the way the sun tried to convince us it had forgiven the night. Haloon was already in the cellar, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. "Half the samples oxidized overnight," she announced. I checked the airlocks to were bubbling unevenly, tiny convulsions in the silence. "The cellar's nervous," I said. She gave me a look that meant she'd heard enough metaphors for 1 week. "Maybe it's you who's nervous." She wasn't wrong. Every sound, the drop of condensation, the faint hum of cooling pipes felt like a question. Adrien entered without a word. He carried the scent of the vineyard, wet soil, iron, and something green that refused to name itself. He had already been walking the rows for hours. You could see it in the clay on his boots. "Morning," he said, as if the word had weight and needed both hands to lift. "Barrel 48 is holding," I told him, "and the others, still deciding whether to live." He nodded. "Slow. That makes 2 of us." We worked without speaking. I measured dissolved oxygen, locked temperatures, adjusted valves. He moved barrels, his shoulders brushing dust from the air. When he passed me a wrench, his fingers barely touched mine, but the touch carried a pulse, the kind that travels up the spine and pretends to be accidental. Round noon, a car arrived, a sleek, silver one that didn't belong to mud roads. Helene's eyebrows rose. "You expecting someone?" she asked him. Adrien's posture shifted, a small tightening of memory. "No," he said, but it sounded like the truth had taken a longer route to arrive. A woman stepped out, wearing a linen dress the color of rose. Her hair caught the light as if she'd rehearsed it. "Adrien," she called, smiling. "You never answer your phone." The air changed temperature again. Even the barrels seemed to listen. He walked forward. Not quickly. Not hesitating either. "Claire," he said. But her name wasn't Claire. The syllables betrayed him. "Lucy." It was reflex, a ghost's muscle memory. The woman laughed, soft, like she'd heard that before. "Still confusing your miracles, I see." She kissed his cheek, the way French women do, with grace and entitlement. "Clara," he said, turning to me. "This is Camille." She was Lucy's sister. The room contracted, as if grief had been summoned by name. I nodded politely, though politeness has no antidote for surprise. "Welcome," I said. "We're resuscitating the vintage." Camille's gaze swept over the cellar. "So you're the alchemist." "I prefer scientist," I replied. "Same difference," she murmured. Her eyes were the same shade as the 2016 pale gold, ender light, turning copper when shadowed. She and Adrien spoke in low voices near the stairwell, words half lost under the drone of the dehumidifier. I heard fragments. Estate, auction, Lucy's trust. The kind of nouns that build cages. When they left for the main house, Haloun muttered, "Family ghosts walk on 2 legs." I smiled without humor. "And wear linen." The rest of the afternoon blurred into repetition. Numbers, samples, silence. But by dusk, barrel 48 bloomed again, notes of honeycomb, apricot skin, a whisper of thyme. I leaned over, breathing the sweetness like forgiveness. Adrien returned after sunset. His voice had edges now. "Camille wants to sell the northern lot," he said. "She thinks the name Lucy is worth more than the vines. And what do you think? I think the dead deserve quiet, but the living need work." He poured 2 glasses of the trial blend. "To the living," he said. "To the almost living," I corrected. We drank. The wine hadn't decided who it wanted to be, neither had we. For a moment, the silence between us felt less like absence and more like room to breathe. He looked at me, not searching, not apologizing, simply seeing. It was unbearable in its honesty. "I keep hearing her voice in the rain," he said finally. "It's absurd." "Absurd," I agreed, "but real." "Do you think grief ever finishes fermenting?" I swirled my glass. "No. It just finds a new vessel." He smiled, the first true smile I'd seen since arriving. "You should write that on the label." When he reached across the table to refill my glass, his sleeve brushed mine. It was the smallest contact. Yet the night trembled. I wanted to tell him that compassion is not love, that restoration is not resurrection, but the words lodged somewhere behind my teeth. Instead, I said, "The 2016 is remembering joy. That's progress." He studied me. "And you, Clara? What are you remembering?" I looked toward the vineyard. The moon had risen, washing the vines in silver. How to breathe without someone else's name in the air. He didn't answer. The clock in the hall ticked, and somewhere in that rhythm, The distance between us learned how to grow quietly. When I returned to my room, I found a note on the door. His handwriting neat, unhurried. Thank you for today, for letting me forget. Underneath, a single word, circled once, Lucy. I traced the ink, then folded the paper shut. Grief, I thought, has terrible handwriting. I placed the note between the pages of my ledger, beside a line I'd written earlier. Do not compete. Breathe. Outside, the mist was rising again. The vines whispered the same name over and over, until it sounded like rain. The third morning broke slow and silver. Fog clung to the vines like someone refusing to leave after the music stopped. I opened my window and listened to the sound of harvesters humming down the valley, a low, human rhythm that always makes me feel both very alive and very replaceable. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of burnt toast and rosemary. Haloon was arguing with the delivery man about bottles. Adrien sat by the window, hands round a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Camille stood beside him, leafing through papers that looked like maps but weren't. Morning, I said. They both turned. Camille smiled first, like someone trained in entrances. We're dividing the land, she said lightly, not the ghosts. Don't look so alarmed. Adrien didn't smile. Camille thinks Lucy's trust should end, that the vineyard has mourned long enough. I poured myself coffee, pretending calm. Does grief follow a calendar now? Camille tilted her head. It follows profit. I'm afraid. The words slid through the air like thin glass. Adrien rose, pushing his chair back too hard. Enough. Not in front of my team. I'm not your team, I said before I could stop myself. The sentence hung there too sharp, too honest. Camille's eyebrow arched. Amused. She murmured. So the scientist does have a heart. After she laughed, silence pressed down like a lid. Adrien stood by the sink, staring at the vines beyond the window. She means well, he said. No. She means control. He turned. You don't know her. I know grief when it walks in wearing silk. That shut him up. He laughed once, bitter, then softer. You're right. She always had better clothes. We let the silence settle back, fragile but bearable. Later, in the cellar, I checked barrel 48 again. The air was cool, steady. The sample shimmered with gold, and when I tasted it just a drop, it bloomed like forgiveness on the tongue. Adrien came down quietly. He watched me write notes, then said, Camille thinks we should rename the 2020 to vintage after you, to help sales. I froze mid-sentence. That's absurd. She says Clara sounds honest. International. He smiled faintly. Like a wine that doesn't lie. I don't want my name on a bottle that still smells of ghosts. He stepped closer. You brought life back here. I thought maybe. Adrien. My voice was steadier than I felt. You hired me to save a wine, not to replace a woman. The words hit him like wind snapping a sail. He looked down, then away. I know, but sometimes it feels like the same work. I almost reached out but I remembered the taste of that half-spoken name in my hair, and I let my hand fall. I need air, I said. Outside, the day had cleared. Workers sang between the rows, laughter cracking open the sunlight. I walked to the northern lot, the one Camille wanted to sell. The vines there were younger, their leaves brighter, like they hadn't yet learned what it means to endure. I crouched, touched the soil. It was warm, living. I could feel the pulse of the roots, the small insistence of growth. And then I heard footsteps behind me. You shouldn't wander alone, Camille said. Her perfume smelled like white magnolia and calculation. I was checking the drainage, I said. Of course. She smiled, the kind that never reaches the eyes. You must find this place very romantic. A widower, a vineyard, all this tragic beauty. It's work, I said flatly. Work, she repeated, amused. Is that what you call it? I stood, brushing soil from my hands. You think I'm here for him? I think everyone who comes here is, she said softly. Lucy had that effect, even after she was gone. The vineyard still belongs to her. Even Adrienne's guilt is hers. She leaned closer, and maybe now, so are you. Something in me went cold. You mistake empathy for inheritance. Her laugh was low. Don't we all? She turned, walking back toward the house, linen dress swaying like a flag that had forgotten its country. When she disappeared, I exhaled. The vines rustled, restless, as if they'd overheard everything. That night, I found Adrien in the old distillery, the one no one used anymore. He was sitting on a crate, holding a glass of the 2016. The light from a single ball painted his face in amber and regret. "She's right," he said before I could speak. Everything Lucy touched became story. Even this. He lifted the glass. "Even me." I sat across from him. "And what did you touch, Adrien? What became story because of you?" He looked at me, then not through me, but into you, he said quietly. "You did." The words settled between us, dangerous and sincere. The distillery smelled of copper and memory. I felt the warmth of wine in my throat, the pulse of something starting to turn. I wanted to tell him not to say it. That grief often mistakes light for love, but his hand was trembling, and my heart, traitorous thing, mirrored the tremor. He set the glass down, leaned forward until the space between us was no longer safe. "Clara, don't," I whispered, but I didn't move away. Outside, thunder murmured again over the hills, a rehearsal for the storm that refused to arrive. He stopped just short of touching me, his breath uneven. "You make it quiet," he said, for the first time in years. "I don't know if that's healing," I said, "or anesthesia." He closed his eyes. "Maybe both." And in that almost kiss, that fragile distance, I understood the cruel symmetry of what we'd become. I was teaching his wine to breathe, while he was teaching me how to hold my breath. By the fourth day, the wind stopped pretending to be gentle. It came off the hills with a metallic smell, the kind that makes you taste thunder before it arrives. The workers tied down tarps and prayed to gods they didn't believe in. In the cellar, the barrels groaned like ships. I decided to leave, not forever, just enough distance to hear my own breath again. I packed my notes, called the station for the next train to Avignon, and told Helene to keep oxygen readings every 6 hours. "You're really going?" she asked. "I need to remember who I am when I'm not listening for someone else's ghosts." She nodded. "Serious. Storm's coming. It usually takes something with it." Outside, the sky looked bruised. Adrien was by the loading dock, shouting orders over the rising wind. When he saw my suitcase, his face stilled. "Running?" he asked. "Retreating," I corrected, "until the weather and everything else clears." "You can't leave tonight." "I can't stay," lightning answered for both of us, cutting the horizon in half. He took a step forward, rain already spotting his shirt. "Clara," but before he could continue, Camille appeared, umbrellas snapping backward in the gust. "The roof by the fermentation room is leaking," she shouted. The storm made the decision for me. We ran. Water spilled through cracks in the tiles. The air smelled of oak and panic. I grabbed a tarp. Adrien climbed the ladder. Camille held the beam. For a moment it looked almost domestic, 3 people saving something fragile because none of them knew how to save themselves. Then the wind tore harder. The ladder shifted. Adrien slipped. I reached for his arm and caught him just before he hit the floor. For a second our faces were inches apart. Both of us soaked, breathing like fugitives. "Let go," he said. "Not yet." We steadied the tarp, secured the ropes. The rain thickened, drumming on the roof like applause for the living. When it was finally over, the cellar smelled of wet stone and near disaster. Camille had gone to check the house. Adrien and I sat on overturned crates, water dripping from our hair. "You should have left earlier," he said. "I tried. I keep ruining your exits." I laughed. "Tired. It's a pattern." He looked at me then, eyes darker than the storm. "Why did you stay?" "Because 48 still remembers joy." He exhaled, almost a laugh. "And me?" "You were learning." Silence followed, heavy but honest. He reached out, not to touch but to hold the air between us, as if testing whether it could bear weight. Thunder rolled again, farther now, softened by distance. "I don't know what comes next," he said. "Neither do I answered. "But tomorrow, we start the recalibration. The wine needs balance." He smiled faintly. "And you?" "I'll find mine somewhere else." We both stood. The lights flickered once, then steadied. In that brief darkness his hand brushed my sleeve, a contact small enough to deny later, large enough to remember. When I reached the doorway, he said quietly, "Thank you for holding on." "Don't thank me," I said. It was instinct, not mercy. Outside, the rain had gentled into mist. I walked toward the guest house. Suitcase damp, heart louder than the wind. Behind me, the vineyard breathed again, broken, alive, waiting for morning. Morning came thin and colorless, as if the world had been rinsed too hard. The vineyard smelled of wet iron and crushed leaves. I walked down to the cellar before anyone else, afraid of what I'd find. The floor was slick with puddles, the air cold and metallic. Barrel 48 stood upright, undamaged. The others had not been so lucky, 3 leaking. One overturned, the rest bruised by wind and panic. The storm had chosen its victims. I touched the staves of 48 with the back of my hand, whispering, "You survived." The wood was warm, pulsing faintly. It answered like a living thing. Haloon arrived carrying a clipboard and exhaustion. "Roof stable," she said. "North lots half flooded." Camille screaming about insurance. Adrien, in the office, probably blaming himself. "Good," I said. "It suits him." She smiled warily. "You're leaving today, aren't you?" "Yes." "Will you come back?" "I never do," I said. And she didn't ask what I meant. By noon, the sun returned white, merciless, disinfecting everything it touched. The vines looked smaller in that light, stripped of their secrets. I packed my samples, my notes, my silence. Adrien found me by the terrace. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. His shirt still smelled faintly of rain and copper. "Camille's gone to the bank," he said, "to finalize the sale. And you?" I told her to wait. He rubbed his temples. "I don't know if she will." "I'm not sure it matters." "It does," he said sharply, then softer. "It does to me." I closed my suitcase. "Adrien, there's nothing left to save but time." "Clara, I mean it. You can build a new vintage. You can forgive her. You can even forgive yourself. But don't ask the wine or me to keep living for her." He stepped forward, desperate in that quiet way that never works. "And if I asked you to stay for me?" I shook my head. "You wouldn't mean it next season." Wine rustled through the vines like applause from ghosts. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cork from the storm night. It was split down the middle. "A reminder," he said, handing it to me, "that not everything broken is lost." I took it, closing my fingers around the jag shape. "And not everything saved is whole." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was softer now, tired rather than tense. I thought about the first night, the smell of green almonds and thunder, and how far we hadn't really come. He finally said, "Will you write to me? I'll send reports." "That's not the same." "No," I said. "It's cleaner." He looked at me then, not pleading, not even regretful, just human. "You changed this place. So did the storm. I'll miss your breath on the glass," he said. And it almost ended me. But I smiled instead, small and steady. "Teach your wine to breathe on its own." He nodded. "Safe travels, Clara. Good harvests, Adrien." I walked down the dirt path toward the road, suitcase bumping against my knee. At the end of the row, I turned once more. He was still standing on the terrace, a figure carved from light and loss. The wind carried the faintest scent of verbena and peach, the 2016, still alive somewhere in the dark. I didn't look back again. The train would take me north to another vineyard, another grief waiting to be translated into chemistry. But for the first time in years, I inhaled without fear of memory. The air was sharp, clean, empty enough to fill. And in that quiet, I finally remembered the rule I'd almost forgotten. Do not compete. Breathe. Winter found me farther north, where the vineyards sleep longer and the air smells of frost and bark. Here, the vines don't sing. They breathe in whispers, slow and sure. I rent a small cottage near the river and work for a quiet estate that grows more patience than profit. The owner, an old woman named Therese, insists that every harvest should end with gratitude, even for the grapes that fail. I am learning her kind of faith. Most mornings I walk to the river with my notebook. I write down temperatures, soil moisture, and the small, invisible miracles that make wine possible. Sometimes I think I am writing to the ghosts I left behind. Sometimes I think they are finally quiet enough to read. In February, a letter arrived. Cream paper, my name written in Adrien's careful hand. No return address, but the scent of thyme and oak clung to the envelope. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the table for 2 days, as if patience could change what it would say. When I finally unfolded the pages, the handwriting wavered only slightly. "Clara, the 2016 survived. We bottled it last week. Camille kept her share of the estate, but she agreed to let the wine bear a new name. It's called La Veille, the Awakening. The bitterness you wrote about softened. There's a sweetness now that none of us expected. I wish you could have tasted it. Maybe one day you will." "You were right, Grief never finishes fermenting. It only finds another vessel. Thank you for teaching me to listen when silence speaks. AF. The paper smelled faintly of rain, as if the ink had passed through a storm before reaching me. I read it once, then again, then once more for the space between lines, the place where everything unsaid lives. That evening, I opened a bottle from the Vineyard here. Its label was plain, its story unremarkable, but when I poured it, the color caught the lamplight in the same way the Lucy once had, golden, almost forgiving. I lifted the glass to my lips. It tasted of pear, river stone, and something impossible to name, the flavor of moving on. Outside, snow began to fall. It touched the vines with the gentlest certainty, as if promising they would wake again. I raised my glass toward the night and whispered, "Here's to the ones who remember, and the ones who finally forget." The window fogged with my breath, soft and human, and for the first time since Provence, I didn't wipe it away.